if, in the story of One Piece, the two brothers Luffy and Ace switched devil fruits? How would Luffy utilize flames, and how differently would Ace's story unfold with the power of Nika? Well, the moment young Luffy bit into the strange, swirled fruit Shanks had stored, his fate changed forever. Overwhelming heat surged through his body as the power of the Mera Mera no Mi took hold, replacing his ability to swim with control over flames. It was terrifying at first, as his flames seemed to consume everything around him, but Shanks calmed him down. Luffy began training to control his newfound power, and his brothers, Ace and Sabo, helped him along the way. Training in the forests of Dawn Island, the trio honed their combat skills, but now Luffy's abilities put him leagues ahead of his brothers. Flames engulfed his fists, turning simple punches into devastating blows. Ace and Sabo had a tough time sparring with the intangible Luffy, but they soon began to adapt. Using buckets of water and learning how to dodge Luffy's flames, the two became much stronger. Luffy's body itself became resistant to heat, and he began using his powers in increasingly creative ways. The intangibility, however, was one of his strongest assets, with only Garp's punches posing a significant threat when Luffy was messing around. But tragedy struck when Sabo's ship was destroyed by the Celestial Dragons. The remaining brothers swore to become stronger, each setting off on their journeys. Luffy, still carrying his dream of becoming the Pirate King, set sail with his fire burning brighter than ever. Luffy's journey across the East Blue became a whirlwind of destruction, as his first real test came with Alvida, whose iron club was useless against his flames. With a single burst of fire, he sent her and her crew scrambling for the sea, earning the respect of Kobe without breaking a sweat. Next was Captain Morgan, whose marine-based Luffy's flames turned into an inferno, forcing Helmeppo to surrender Zoro's swords almost immediately. Zoro, witnessing Luffy's raw power, was impressed but wary of the reckless heat. Nevertheless, he joined without hesitation. Buggy the Clown fared no better. His Chop Chop fruit made him immune to cutting attacks, but fire was an entirely different threat. Luffy's flames burned Buggy's clothing and nearly charred him alive, forcing the clown to flee in humiliation. At Barati, Don Krieg's armor, weapons, and gas-based strategies meant nothing against the Mera Mera no Mi. Luffy incinerated his arsenal before Krieg could even attempt his usual tricks. Even Mihawk, watching from a distance, noted Luffy's potential. Arlong's tyranny ended in a blaze. The saw-nosed fisherman's brute strength and water-based advantage seemed formidable at first, but Luffy's heat turned the battlefield against him. Arlong soon became a crispy barbecue, and Nami was saved and added to the crew. By the time Luffy reached Logtown, he had built a pretty scary reputation as an almost untouchable pirate who burned every one of his enemies. But Smoker's Logia abilities made him the first real challenge. Luffy's flames couldn't directly harm the smoke-bodied marine. However, just as in the original timeline, fate intervened, allowing Luffy to escape toward the Grand Line. While Luffy carved his way through the East Blue, Ace's story took a different path. During his journey, he stumbled upon the same island where, in the original timeline, he would have found the Mera Mera no Mi. But here, he found the Gomu Gomu no Mi instead, and gained the power of a rubber man. Ace had already become a really strong pirate by this time, so he found it odd trying to adapt to his new stretchy body. But soon enough, he began using his powers effectively. He started deflecting bullets and cannon fire and using his body to withstand the brute force of blunt weapons. He began utilizing the elasticity of his body to increase the power of his attacks and soon refined them to achieve excessive levels of strength. When Ace challenged Whitebeard, he had become an amazing hand-to-hand fighter. He had a versatile moveset and incredible endurance that let him tank huge amounts of punishment. Whitebeard recognized his potential and invited him to join the crew, much like in the original timeline. Ace then quickly rose to the rank of commander. Fast forwarding to the future, Luffy found himself closing in on his second challenge on Skypiea against the self-proclaimed god, Enel. Originally, Luffy beat Enel because of his rubber body, but this time, Luffy didn't have that advantage. Enel's lightning had so much force behind it that it even seared Luffy in his Logia form. Enel's overconfidence was clear, but Luffy had trained hard all his life and wouldn't let some damage get the better of him. He endured the battle before realizing that he could beat Enel by using heat dispersion. Using his flames, Luffy forced the air to expand and create pockets that made Enel's electricity ineffective, as it couldn't conduct properly. The battle raged as Enel threw a large number of bolts at Luffy, but our hero kept using his flames to move around unpredictably, making it much harder for Enel to hit his target. Luffy then went on the offensive, doing minor damage to the Logia user. Enel became overconfident due to the minimal damage he received, so he let Luffy hit him once. Ever the opportunist, Luffy focused his flames and charged them on a single point, before quickly releasing them in a ray that shot toward Enel at blinding speed. Unable to dodge, Enel took the hit directly and was sent crashing through his arc. That one move was enough to end Enel's ambitions, and Luffy ended up coming out on top in this battle between Logia users. The crew began training harder with Luffy after that fight to learn how to properly deal with a Logia user. Zoro and Sanji were both adamant about finding a way to deal with Luffy's intangible form. Zoro realized that his blades would have to be strong and sharp enough to cut fire itself, and with that thought, he eventually got to the point where he developed a version of armament haki much sooner than he would have in the original timeline. By the time they reached Water 7, each member was significantly stronger. They fought against CP9, winning with relative ease as Luffy and the gang blazed through all of them. Even Rob Lucci wasn't strong enough to deal with Luffy's flames. After welcoming aboard Brook and getting the 1000 Sunny, the crew had become extremely strong rookies when they set foot on Sabaody. Even the fight against Kizaru and the Pacifistas played out differently. Zoro and Sanji's early Haki awakening meant that the two of them could destroy the Pacifistas with far less struggle than before. Luffy's flames melted through the first cyborg effortlessly, shocking Sentomaru and the Marines. When Kizaru arrived, Luffy attempted to counter the Admiral's light speed attacks with superheated air distortions, managing to hold his own slightly longer than before. Despite their improved strength, they were still far from ready for an Admiral. Rayleigh's intervention gave them a brief chance, but as soon as Bartholomew Kuma appeared, the inevitable happened. One by one, the crew vanished, sent to their respective islands for 2 years of intense training. Ace's story played out much the same, except this time, he fought Blackbeard with the Gomu Gomu no Mi instead of the Mera Mera no Mi. Without fire to counteract Blackbeard's darkness, Ace relied entirely on his rubber abilities and Haki. His power allowed him to deliver unpredictable, powerful attacks, but Blackbeard's ability to nullify Devil Fruits was too much to handle. The fight was brutal, and Ace soon found himself cornered. Blackbeard used his overwhelming strength and his overpowered Devil Fruit to significantly reduce Ace's options, and in the end, he won the battle. Ace was captured and handed over to the Marines, setting the stage for Marineford. Luffy's journey remained unchanged. After discovering Ace was captured, Luffy headed straight to Impel Down, the world government's unbreakable prison. There, he ended up facing Magellan and was cornered, but he escaped with his life as his flames burned away some of the venom before it fully spread. Ivankov then handled the rest. With the help of Crocodile, Jinbei, and the escapees, Luffy launched a prison break that led to many of the prisoners escaping Impel Down, before heading to Marineford to save Ace. The war unfolded a lot like it did in the original timeline. Whitebeard's crew clashed with the full power of the Marines, and the battlefield was gruesome. Ace couldn't do anything but watch his family fight and get injured in front of him, and his frustration was only increasing with each passing moment. When Luffy arrived, crashing into the battlefield in a blaze of fire, Ace's resolve reached its breaking point. Watching his brother fight through waves of Marines, tearing through vice admirals, and even clashing with the warlords of the sea, all to save him, ignited something deep within him. Finally, the moment came. Luffy shattered Ace's cuffs, and for a brief moment, the two stood together, free. But trouble wasn't far behind as Sakazuki came along. The Admiral wasted no time in attacking. With a single devastating magma fist, he aimed to execute Luffy, just as he had originally done with Ace. Then Ace stepped in to block the blow, but this time, something changed. As Sakazuki's fist met his body, Ace's frustration, pain, and overwhelming emotions triggered something deep inside him, and suddenly, his heart started beating harder. Ace's body began to stretch and contort with the world around him, and his hair turned white. The sun god, Nika, had arrived on the battlefield. Ace's body became fluid and surreal, moving with a cartoonish elasticity that baffled Sakazuki. His punches twisted and rebounded unpredictably and kept brushing away all of Sakazuki's attacks. He bent the battlefield to his will, warping the ground beneath Sakazuki and sending him crashing through layers of Marineford. Sakazuki, once an overwhelming force, suddenly found himself at a disadvantage. Ace's awakened power nullified his attacks with sheer elasticity, preventing the Admiral from landing any decisive blows. With a grin full of defiance, Ace rained down fiery, rubber-infused strikes, overwhelming Sakazuki and sending the Fleet Admiral crashing into the ground. With Sakazuki momentarily incapacitated, Ace and Luffy rallied beside Whitebeard. The old legend, though gravely injured, unleashed one final, devastating quake, shattering the Marine forces. Luffy, pushing himself to his limits, engulfed his entire body in fire, sending waves of destruction toward the encroaching Marines. Ace, now in full control of his awakened power, played with the battlefield itself, bending reality around him to protect his allies and strike at the remaining high-ranking Marines. Together, the three warriors held the line, fending off any further execution attempts as the war reached its climax. The three caused so much chaos on the battlefield that even the Marines had a tough time regrouping, and when they came close to it was all too late. Shanks and the red-haired pirates had appeared and brought the battle to a halt. Sakazuki was badly wounded. Marineford was in ruins, and yet Whitebeard was still standing. And beside him, Ace had awakened a devil fruit that allowed him to wield a godly level of power. The final nail in the coffin was Shanks' presence on Marineford. With a single declaration, he offered the chance to end the bloodshed or continue the war with him as opposition. Sengoku, recognizing the sheer chaos that had unfolded, agreed to a ceasefire. With the fight closed off with the Marines' massive loss, Ace, Luffy, and the rest of Whitebeard's crew escaped Marineford with their lives. Luffy finally had a chance to properly reunite with his brother, who had now achieved an extremely strong power-up. Ace, fully aware of his potential and responsibility, knew he could no longer afford to be reckless. Whitebeard had sustained numerous injuries during this battle, and he was already old and sick. Ace realized that it was up to him now to fill Whitebeard's massive shoes. Meanwhile, Luffy recognized that he was still far from his peak and needed to push himself beyond his current limits. The two brothers parted ways with their own aims for the journey ahead. Ace, alongside Marco and the rest of the crew, decided that they wouldn't take this lying down. They would re-establish their place as one of the strongest forces in the New World. At the same time, Luffy, under Rayleigh's guidance, prepared for 2 years of relentless training, determined to become strong enough to face any challenge. The world held its breath as the tides of power began to shift. In the wake of Marineford, Blackbeard wasted no time expanding his influence. He and his growing crew set their sights on conquering Whitebeard's territories, declaring themselves as the new dominant force. Ace, however, refused to let Teach run unchecked. Ace had now awakened his powers, so he spent a few months refining them and getting the hang of them. Once he became comfortable with his abilities, he arranged for a final battle against Blackbeard on Bonaro Island, the place where he had previously lost. The entire place was in ruins because of the last battle, but Ace would settle his score with Blackbeard here. As the sun began setting, the two crews arrived on the island with only their elites. This time, Ace would be the new Dawn. After a few moments, the war broke out in full force. The battlefield was chaotic. Marco clashed with Shiryu. Jozu battled against Avalo Pizarro, and the rest of the commanders fought against Teach's growing crew. And right in the middle stood Ace and Blackbeard as their conquerors hockey clashed. Blackbeard's massive frame stood over Ace as he reached out, and the darkness of his Yami Yami no Mi began seeping out like a dark cloud. He mocked Ace for coming after him again, even though he knew of the power Ace displayed at Marineford. Despite that, he thought his Devil Fruit was enough to take away Ace's power. Then suddenly, the darkness began swallowing the battlefield in an abyssal tide. Ace moved just as the attack reached him, his hair turning white as his body floated away from the darkness. With a flicker of hockey, he rebounded off the ground and shot toward Teach like a bullet. His fist cocked back and coated in jet black armament. The impact struck Blackbeard's jaw, sending him skidding backward, but the darkness absorbed the force of Ace's blow. Blackbeard immediately countered by seizing Ace's arm, and his power began sucking it away, but Ace reacted just as fast, his hockey overpowering Blackbeard's Devil Fruit as it burst out. But Teach sent a fist to Ace's gut and sent him flying across the battlefield. Ace almost crashed, but he rebounded off the air and grabbed Blackbeard's darkness itself before pulling him toward him and hitting him square in the face. As Blackbeard was sent flying, Ace spun through the air, twisting his body into a spiraling drill-like motion before driving his heel down toward Teach's shoulder. Blackbeard roared in pain as the hockey-infused kick sent him sprawling. The battle raged on, and the ground around them began cracking under their feet from the sheer force. Ace fought with a fluidity that seemed almost comical, his movements erratic and impossible to predict. Every time Blackbeard tried to grab him, Ace stretched away out of reach and countered. Teach was fairly annoyed, and he shouted in fury as he created a massive pool of darkness and began sucking Ace in with an intense pull. Ace battled against the force, but it was too quick and strong. As Ace was pulled toward Blackbeard, he suddenly inflated his entire body and transformed into a giant. As he grew larger, so did his strength. With massive fists, Ace began pounding Blackbeard over and over, forcing him back as his darkness tried to absorb the power of the strikes. Ace smiled, leveraging his upper hand, springing across the battlefield like a powerful cannonball, his hits landing with crushing strength. But Blackbeard wasn't going down without a fight. He unleashed another wave of darkness for one final attempt. Ace was swallowed by the massive amount of darkness, and he suddenly vanished into it. For a moment, silence filled the battlefield as the Whitebeard pirates looked on to see that their captain was consumed. Then the darkness trembled. A glow could suddenly be seen before a rumbling sound filled the air, and the darkness instantly burst apart in a flash of light as Ace glowed like the sun. Blackbeard barely had a second to react before Ace appeared and dashed toward him. His fist, now glowing with hockey, crashed into Teach's gut with such force that the air around them compressed and exploded outward in a shockwave. Teach coughed blood, his body folding from the impact before he was sent flying across the battlefield. Ace didn't stop. He rebounded off the ground, his limbs twisting and spiraling unnaturally, launching himself forward again. With an almost playful laugh, he pounded Blackbeard with a relentless flurry of rubber-coated strikes, each one bending and twisting in ways that made them impossible to predict. Teach howled in rage, trying to summon his darkness. But every time he reached out, Ace's rubberized form stretched, twisted, and rebounded, evading his grasp like a phantom. Ace's fists warped the air, striking Teach from every angle at once, leaving him no room to counterattack. He shifted reality as his body glowed with power. His fist inflated once again and seemed to eclipse the entire island. That thunderous fist came crashing down with a power unlike any other, as if he were the sun itself. Blackbeard could only look up in horror as the fist approached him. With one final strike, Ace compressed all that power, launching forward with a devastating hockey-infused punch straight to Blackbeard's face. The impact shattered the ground beneath him, sending shockwaves across the entire island. Blackbeard's massive form was lifted off the ground and sent crashing into the rubble, unmoving. The battle was over. The Whitebeard pirates, seeing their victory, roared in triumph. The remaining members of Blackbeard's crew, seeing their captain defeated, fled in terror, leaving Teach unconscious and broken in the ruins of the battlefield. Ace, breathing heavily, stood over his fallen foe. The war was won. The Whitebeard pirates had reclaimed their throne. Once Luffy finished his training, he proceeded to overcome Don Quixote do Flamingo, during which he reunited with his long-lost brother, Sabo. Luffy would proceed to carry on his adventure until he rejoined the other Straw Hats in Wano. The tale would unfold similarly to the original until the moment Luffy battled Kaido, after which the ultimate confrontation would begin. Luffy faced Kaido, his form beaten and wounded, his breath uneven. The combat area was a destroyed wasteland. The Earth below them charred and fractured. The beast pirates were spread out, their troops vanquished. The sole conflict left was between Luffy and Kaido, the pivotal showdown of the assault on Wano. Kaido was a massive beast, and Luffy seemed tiny in front of him. His whole body cast a shadow over Luffy, and his dragon scales glowed from the heat of Luffy's attacks. Despite all the damage Kaido had taken, he still seemed like a mountain in front of our hero. Luffy clenched his fists, flames flickering wildly around his body as his strength began to fade. The Mera Mera no Mi was incredibly powerful when coupled with Luffy's haki, but even its heat wasn't enough to burn through Kaido's overwhelming endurance. The Emperor just wasn't going down! Then Kaido exhaled, smoke rising from his nostrils as he lifted his club. In an instant, he closed the distance between them, swinging the massive weapon downward. Luffy barely managed to dodge, rolling to the side as the club shattered the ground like a bomb. Luffy was clearly past his limit, but even still, he could feel something inside him burn, an intense pressure and heat that wasn't like anything he had experienced before. His flames were strong, but they weren't enough. He needed more. Before he could tap into what was inside him, Kaido attacked again, twisting into a spinning strike. Luffy barely had time to react and was sent crashing into the remains of a ruined building. The force knocked the wind out of him. His vision blurred, and his flames instantly dissipated. But then it happened. A fire ignited inside of him, which seemed to flow through his veins. It was a fire that was hotter than anything Luffy had ever created before. His heart was beating on overdrive like an engine, and his body suddenly burst into flames that went from orange to bluish white. Luffy's body seemed to pulse as his flames stopped waving around and the heat started melting the ground underneath him. The air around him warped, distorting from the sheer intensity of the flames. His hair, once wild and untamed, erupted into a bluish-white inferno, flowing like liquid fire. His body was glowing like a star as his flames were jetting out. Kaido's expression hardened. He could feel the shift. This wasn't just another power-up, this was something new. Luffy began levitating, and the ground beneath him began to melt and turn into magma. His eyes were barely visible through the heat as he looked at Kaido. Seeing the power, Kaido shifted to his dragon form and began floating above Onigashima. In an instant, Luffy had slammed into him with so much force that it felt like an explosion. The onslaught was instant and devastating as Luffy kept driving into Kaido's massive form, pushing it like it was a rag doll. Kaido tried to pull back and launched a bolo breath. The two attacks collided for only a moment before Kaido's fire was completely overwhelmed, swallowed by Luffy's pure white inferno. Before Kaido could react, Luffy's fist collided with his face. The world seemed to slow. A deafening shockwave rippled through the air. Kaido's massive dragon form was sent hurtling to the ground. Luffy slammed down once more on the dragon, and the impact was cataclysmic. Kaido dug into the earth, his body carving a massive crater into Onigashima. The entire island shook, splitting apart at its foundation. White-hot flames consumed everything, turning the battlefield into a molten wasteland. Luffy landed, his form still burning, his breath heavy. He stared down at Kaido, who lay within the wreckage, his body motionless. For a long moment, silence reigned. The strongest creature alive had been defeated. The battlefield erupted in cheers as the remaining forces of Wano, the Straw Hats, and their allies watched in awe. Luffy had done it. He had defeated Kaido. He had freed Wano. As he stood there, flames still flickering around him, the world had no choice but to recognize a new reality. Monkey D. Luffy had defeated an Emperor of the Sea. The news spread all across the seas, and Luffy himself was crowned as an Emperor of the Sea. Now, a family of two brothers was among the strongest forces alive, and the Marines were in dire straits. The Straw Hats would continue their journey soon after, and it would lead them to Egghead. This is where things would take a turn. The crew met Dr. Vegapunk on this island and soon became friends. But the friendship wouldn't last long, as CP0 agents arrived to capture Vegapunk and take his research. It seems like the scientist had stuck his nose where it didn't belong. The island would soon devolve as a massive battle took place with the arrival of the Elders, the ones at the top of the world government, beings that possessed immense power. This led to a series of battles where the Straw Hats fought alongside Vegapunk's satellite bodies against a Buster Call and the Five Elders. The Straw Hats had faced impossible odds before, but this was undeniably different. Luffy fought and pushed his flames beyond his limits. He was a force to be reckoned with. But the Elders had the advantage of both power and immortality, and Luffy could not sustain his awakening for so long, having recently acquired it. The crew was in dire straits, and no giant robot was going to come save them this time. Luffy realized that the situation would take a massive turn once his power dissipated, so he ordered Zoro to flee the island with Vegapunk and the rest. Despite his initial refusal, Zoro caved in after being ordered by his captain, and Luffy stayed behind. As his crew made their desperate escape, Luffy faced the full wrath of the Elders and Kizaru alone. He fought like a cornered beast, every attack carrying the weight of his unbreakable spirit. But no matter how brightly his fire burned, he was outnumbered. The Gorosei's attacks bypassed even his haki, their ancient power, unlike anything he had ever faced. He had massively wounded Admiral Kizaru, and one of the Elders sustained an injury that didn't seem to heal. But then, Luffy's power sputtered out. That was all that he could manage, and the Elders would not let the opportunity slip. And then, darkness. The news shattered the world. Monkey D. Luffy, Emperor of the Sea, had been captured. He was dragged in sea stone chains to Mary Jawaz, imprisoned in the very heart of the enemy's power. The Straw Hat pirates, scattered and battered, knew what had to be done. Their captain had never abandoned them. Now, it was their turn. Robin made her way to the revolutionaries, her connection to them giving her the leverage to demand their full force. She found Sabo, who whose rage burned like an inferno upon hearing of his brother's fate. Dragon did not hesitate. The revolution had been waiting for a moment like this, a reason to wage their final war. The rest of the Straw Hats sought out Ace. When Ace heard of Luffy's capture, the air itself seemed to crack under the pressure of his rage. He had spent years thinking he had lost his only brother. He had sworn to never let that happen again. Now, the world government had taken his youngest. He would burn their world down to get him back. Ace summoned the full might of the Whitebeard pirates, every division, every ship, and every ally they had gathered over the years. The force of a Yonko crew ready for war. Then there was Shanks. The red-haired pirates learned of what had happened, and their captain did not hesitate. He had once stopped a war. Now he would start one. Across the world, the ripples of Luffy's capture reached every corner. The people he had saved, the warriors of Alabasta, the minks of Zoo, the samurai of Wano, the merfolk, all heard and answered the call, including, of course, the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. Luffy had never fought for himself. He had fought for them. Now they would fight for him. A massive coalition was formed that reached Mary Joaz, and then the battle began. The sky turned red with fire and blood as the greatest war in history erupted at the heart of the world. The Holy Land, once untouched, became a battlefield of flames, steel, and haki. Ace led the charge. The Gomu Gomu no Mi fully awakened, making him an unrelenting storm of destruction. The Whitebeard pirates tore through enemy lines, their war cries shaking the heavens. Shanks and his crew cut down the government's strongest forces, his sword flashing as the Marines fell before him. Sabo and the revolutionaries liberated prisoners, toppling the very foundations of Mary Joaz. Afterward, Luffy was freed. A pillar of white-hot flames erupted from the heart of the Holy Land. Luffy stepped forward, his hair a white-bluish blaze, his body surrounded by fire so intense it warped the air itself. The elders appeared with the God's Knights, but even they felt the power that faced them. 3 emperors had joined forces, the drums of liberation were beating, and 1 emperor had the power of the sun. Ace clashed with Imu, the true ruler of the world, as the rest clashed with the elders. Their fights shattered the sky, 2 awakened forces colliding in an all-out war. Imu's power sought to erase existence itself, but Ace's willpower and unbreakable haki refused to be extinguished, while Luffy's flames were like the force of life itself. His flames were so immense that they seemed to burn through the immortality of the elders, and with his brothers at his back, nothing seemed insurmountable. The battle raged until the tyrants finally fell. With the God's Knights, elders, and Imu defeated, the celestial dragons lost their power. Their empire, built on centuries of oppression, crumbled to ash. The war was over. Make sure to subscribe for more One Piece videos.